Welcome to another episode of the CarryTrainer Higher Line podcast. Hey y'all, welcome to a special episode of the Higher Line podcast this July 4th, 2023. We've got one of our first guests from the Higher Line back 4 or 5 years ago, Mr. Mike Gillette, like the razor blades. Yeah.
Good to be with you.
I appreciate you coming back. You are a pretty special individual, which I really have a bunch of new questions for you from the last time. Paratrooper, SWAT cop, but a lot of people know you because you do crazy feats of strength and like bend rebar against your throat and do all kinds of, I don't want to say crazy, but things that I think I read one guy said,
term.
I think it was a doctor maybe or a physicist that wrote something to the effect of half of what Mike does would kill most people. The other half like doesn't make sense. Something to that effect. Like,
I think that's a pretty good summation. It's one of those things. Well, it's like anything that's a bit out of the ordinary. It's like what you do. I'm sure you have normal quote unquote friends that don't understand the road warrior aspect of your life. You know, so much time devoted to such a singular niche activity. So everybody has their own version of crazy. You know, mine is just perhaps a little more physically dangerous than the average.
What would make a person? So just you guys listening, the rebar thing, I'll start with that. And that's not what I really want to like dig into with you, but just so people understand what we're talking about. It's not that you didn't bend rebar along its long axis. So you have a person poke you in your trachea with the half-inch end of the rebar. Like if you guys are listening, imagine somebody taking like a pole and sticking it in your trachea, the soft part, and then Mike flexes and he drives into it while somebody's holding like what, an 8-foot piece of steel, maybe?
Usually six.
But, yeah. Okay, that's even harder.
If it was 8, it'd be a little bit easier, but that starts to get a bit unwieldy.
Okay, it's bouncing around and stuff.
Yeah.
So then you drive into it while somebody else is holding the other end of it, and you literally force it to bend, which right. I think the one test I saw you doing before you begin, you drive that piece of rebar through a big watermelon to show people like.
Yeah, which was actually the first time I did that. That was for a television appearance. And they wanted to have some sort of, proof that it wasn't, I don't know, like the trick rebar that you buy at the magic shop or something like that.
Yeah.
Which really hadn't occurred to me.
I've got a whole closet full of that stuff.
Yeah. If there was such a thing, it might be handy to have on those off days. But in that particular stunt or feat is not anything that I originated. That's something that I saw when I was young, performed by martial artists. And a lot of the feats of strength that I do are not strength related so much as they're more sort of endurance tests, or what the Chinese would refer to as iron body feats. Which is basically, cultivating a certain state of mind where I don't shroud any of this in mysticism. It's not like, I have some mystical inner force going on. It's just a collection of things that I find interesting. I was sort of captivated by them when I was very young and saw them on TV, that sort of thing. And you just have to be willing to test yourself in a particular way. Some people do ultra marathons. That's just the same kind of pain over a much longer duration. Mine gets over quickly. So it's just a way of testing myself, and all of the feats of strength are really sort of that within the mind training space, rather than just sort of chalk things up to being, potentially theoretically true. Well, let's find out, and let's find out if you can make yourself do something that you couldn't do before. So it's kind of a proof of concept or a methodological validation, if we wanted to make it sound fancy.
How does one practice to not have a piece of rebar penetrate the thin skin of their neck? I've practiced martial arts in some capacity since I was 8-9 years old. And I remember, especially like 70s, 80s, when all of the Eastern martial arts started to spread across America like Brazilian jiu-jitsu is doing now, or the shooting sports are doing now.
Mm-hmm.
Every town had 10 taekwondo, hapkido, kung fu schools. And so that's like kind of where the joke doing karate in the garage came from, right? In those years. So I remember trying to like break boards and stuff, and you didn't know what you were doing. You just knew if I hit this thing, it might break. And so like you'd be busting your hands up and doing stupid crap like that. How do you not poke a hole in your neck?
Well, I have injured myself a time or two doing some of the things that I do, but I've never had a specific neck injury because I do the rebar. I also do arrow breaking.
What's that? Oh, arrows. Yeah.
Which is also something that I saw when I was very young and I was completely captivated by. As far as the internet says, I'm the only person who breaks multiple arrows at one time.
So the arrow's not shot into you, but it's being pushed against your neck.
Okay, so now you just gave me another great idea to put on. I'm kidding. No. Although within the martial arts, I've seen demos, the arrow catching, which super impressive. I've never done that, and I'm not really sure sort of what's behind that. If there's more cooperation, slash a clever method behind that. But I still think it looks cool when I see it done. No, this is just a question of taking a wooden arrow, steel field tip, very standard, and placing it in that same spot, and then having some type of object that you can brace it against, and then you just simply push in and snap the arrow. Again, with the intent of not injuring oneself. So, and that's actually, I started with arrows before I got to the rebar. Rebar is really, it's a lot more challenging. It takes a lot more force because you're pushing against it in its strongest position, from a physics perspective. It's much easier to bend, going against, the halfway point. But if you're pushing in, it's in the same way. You can snap a pencil very easily in your hands, but to try to push a pencil into a wall and break it requires considerably more force.
Sure.
And,
how old were you when you decided that you wanted to start doing this kind of stuff? Like, were you a kid, like
old enough to know better? I actually was introduced to feats of strength very late in life. And even though, like you, I'd been doing martial arts forever, none of the arts that I was involved in involved, breaking boards, breaking bricks, anything like that. So that was something that was really outside of my frame of reference. I was 48 when I was introduced to feats of strength, and it was entirely on a sort of a research field trip basis. I had been aware of, the martial arts and people who could, bend horseshoes and so forth. And I knew that some of those guys were not.
Which you can do. You can bend a horseshoe.
Correct. And a lot of the people that do that are not guys that you would look at, like your Steve Shaw's, your world's strongest men types, guys,
monsters. I mean, you're a big, fit, muscular dude, though. It's not like you're not like some ectomorph.
Well, I'm 5'9", 1, maybe 78 today. So I mean, I train, but a world's strongest man competitor looks like he can throw a grand piano through a third-story window. There's nothing surprising about that.
Let me see a gun. Let me see one of your.
There you go.
Nice.
But anyway, the thing that was kind of fascinating to me is my introduction to martial arts. When I started, I had my first free Taekwondo lesson because it came with the gym membership, because they were trying to get you to sign up for Taekwondo. And that instructor was, a very legit guy from Korea. And there were pictures of him on the wall, breaking bricks with his fist, breaking bricks with his forehead. And I was just like, and he was a small guy. So my whole sense about the martial arts was that it must be some type of vehicle to allow people to compensate for a lack of size, because I've never been big. And I wanted to do what big people could do. I wanted to be a strong guy. And, of course, I came of age when Bruce Lee was a thing, and I knew that he was a small guy but could do amazing things physically. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with Harry Houdini, who was kind of an early feats of strength guy, even though that's not what he was known for. That's how he trained himself. He was a very small guy, but, crazy tough, crazy focused. And, I identified with that because when I was a kid growing up, I was much smaller than average. I graduated to average eventually. So I had been aware of these feats of strength guys via YouTube and whatnot. There was one guy that sort of stuck out. His name was Dennis Rogers. And Dennis was a guy who was smaller than me, a few years older than me. And he was the first person to take a crescent wrench and bend it in half.
Dang.
Which is just ridiculous. And then he became the first human to take a crescent bench and do what's called S-bending it, which is basically you bend it here, you bend it here, and then you smash it together. So it makes basically like a compressed, well, it's really more of a Z. But how do you do that and not have your body just sort of break apart under the unique stresses that would no doubt produce? And that was sort of the thing that I could never wrap my head around, because I would see these guys do these demos and it's like, okay, I get it. You're able to generate force, but how can you keep doing that? We know about the person who in a fit of panic lifts the car off of the person that it just fell on. Okay. We know that those things happen, but that's not something that you can just reproduce, when you feel like it. So I started corresponding with Dennis, and because I wanted to see if he might allow me to just spend some time with him, watching him train and that sort of thing. And at this point in my life, I had done that kind of thing with martial artists. I had trained privately with some famous martial artists, going to their house and just, being around them and learning what they do from this close. And I always liked doing that when circumstances allowed. So I inquired of Dennis if that would be possible. And at this point, he was still doing a lot of TV and a lot of international travel because he was performing. This is a guy who actually did this stuff on the Oprah show. So like he had a level of visibility that goes way beyond, anybody else that I've ever met in that very narrow realm. But he said, hey, I've got this seminar coming up. I've got some of my proteges coming in from all over the States, a couple from overseas. And if what you really want to do is just see how everybody trains, then that would probably be a good opportunity to do that. Well, that was it. So I spent about 4 days in Houston, Texas, which is where Dennis lives. And he had all of these guys come in, and each of them had sort of their own unique, quirky specialty. And all of them were absolutely amazing. And I spent that time just basically being this close, watching what these guys were doing. And anybody's going to find that appealing on some level, any guy. And, I had grown up as a kid enamored with people like Evel Knievel. So, there's never been a part of me that wasn't up for the, reckless challenge of doing something. I used to take my Schwinn clone, which was a Sears Spider, and, go off the ramps just like all my friends were doing and so forth, with no idea of what we were doing or if we would, do so unscathed. And so there's a little bit of that, I think, kind of baked into that part of my brain going way, way back. But there was something about what I was doing professionally at the time, just in terms of training myself and others to be as strong as they can, to be as, focused and mentally tough as they can. And a lot of that really seemed to be coming alive in these stunts that I was observing from up close. And Dennis was kind of fascinated by me because I had the sort of uber trainer resume by that point. And this was when I was deep into the 5-year span when I was doing bodyguard work. And, he thought that was kind of unique. So I think I got more attention from him probably than I deserved, perhaps. But he was very encouraging. Well, hey, Mike, why don't you try bending this horseshoe? It's like, Den, I can't bend a horseshoe. Come on. This is like hazing the new guy kind of thing, in my opinion. But there was just something about his his emphatic nature. And I tried it and it kind of worked. And it was like, oh, wait a minute, what's this? And that was it. It's like I had a little bit of success bending a steel bar, bending a 60 penny nail. And that was all the motivation I needed, because there's something clearly special about the guys in that room. And one of the things that was probably speaking to me the hardest was, at this point, I'm about 3 years deep in the bodyguard world. And that is the most insular, odd profession that I've ever been exposed to, of the various jobs that I've had.
This is after your time as a police, in the police world.
Yeah. So the cop stuff, SWAT stuff, full-time trainer. And then the bodyguard thing happened towards the end of that, before I became self-employed and started doing the personal development stuff that I've been doing more recently. And, the idea of traveling all the time, of, you're not seen, you're not heard, you're just the sort of anonymous protective bubble floating around the bigger bubble, which is the client. And, feeling that, the rewarding part of that work is when you're doing that work for the kinds of clients that we were doing it for, you intellectually understand. It's like, okay, I'm at the top of the vocational pyramid. This is it. But the downside of that is that same realization. This is it. Okay, now what? Because other than, you can console yourself with the fact that, you're the baddest dude that the novelty of that wears off very quickly, and the novelty of the work wears off faster than that. It is tedious. It is stressful. It's just the same thing over and over for clients who have, we'll just say, unrealistic expectations of how the world should be based on who they are and how special they have become. And that's not somebody who's ever going to value the contributions of those around them. So other than you're well taken care of financially, all of the other stuff sort of stacks up and conspires to suck any potential, satisfaction out of the job. It really becomes just this thing that you do.
I've got a handful of friends in that field that all would concur with what you just said.
Yeah. Now there's the occasional client that's just absolutely amazing to work for. And those are the guys that have very low turnover and, a lot of loyalty from their agents and so forth. But on the average, I had only a couple of longer term clients, and they were very similar to the episodic clients that we would have over and over. And I didn't enjoy it. So there was that part of it, combined with the fact that it was so anonymous. You were just sort of like this invisible force field that was plugged in around the principal, and which is, of course, logical. But there, in an earlier part of my life, I was a much more visible person. If we went all the way back to my police days, so I had the police part of my job, but I had these other facets that just sort of got tacked onto that. I had years of being the community relations guy, and usually that's where the cops who aren't quite cutting it on the street go. But I was sort of, I just thought that would be a good place to be. I felt I was coming of age during the Rodney King era. There was a lot that could be done in my mind in terms of, trying to repair perceptions and addressing misunderstandings about, relations and roles within the community. And I wanted to be part of that. I thought that was really vital. And, sometimes that was a very intense place to be. And I really enjoyed that. And there were other things that I sort of spearheaded in my cop years that made me kind of a high visibility guy. And I felt it was important having that kind of platform and, sort of respecting what that platform was, because when you're the cop that's on TV, you're not you're every cop. You're sort of that implied ambassador for the profession. And there was part of me that sort of missed having that level of connectivity with the outside world, because it certainly didn't exist in the EP universe. And these feats of strength guys, these were guys that were like out in the world. You know, Dennis at sort of one extreme end doing, you know, television and so forth and traveling the world. But the other guys were in schools and churches, in prisons. And it's like, I want some of that. I want to have some type of unique gift that is so compelling that it makes you a logical choice to share something, if in fact you have something to share. And in my mind, I guess I felt I did. And if nothing else, to be an encourager of other people. So I saw kind of the finished product. It wasn't just, hey, I need to, you know, bend a horseshoe because that's going to prove something to me, although that was a small part of it. I saw this as a means to an end, even though I was miles from where that end was. But I've always been pretty good at kind of projecting myself into the future in terms of figuring out where I wanted to go and then, you know, finding a way to get there. So that's how all of the feats of strength stuff happened. And so when you're talking about seeing the rebar go through the watermelon, that came from a TV appearance. I've been on TV multiple times. It makes no sense. I'm not an entertainer per se. I'm barely entertaining, but I do something that's so unique that every now and then I find myself on TV. A couple of weeks ago, I was contacted by Spain's Got Talent. Now, I'm just cool enough to be contacted by Spain's Got Talent, but I'm only cool enough to be contacted 2 weeks before taping, which means there was a much cooler person who must have, yeah, who either got a better gig or got arrested or, you know, passport got revoked or something. But it still creates these, you know, sort of unexpected opportunities. I was contacted by a casting director a couple of days ago about a potential show, which sounded so confusing in terms of the format. Well, the audience does this and then they think that, and it's like, I'm always a little skeptical of any venue where I'm really not sort of in control of what I'm doing, because then I'm not in control of the story that I get to tell about why I even do these things, because I don't want to be just sort of like a sideshow freak. That's not interesting to me. So I spent actually most of that conversation talking about one of my clients, and, you know, maybe that'll turn into something. But it is these things that I do are sort of emblematic of the vocational journey that I've been on. You know, I liken myself in many ways to sort of Forrest Gump. I just happened to be the guy at that moment that could do this particular thing, and it just sort of worked in the context of whatever that time was or that opportunity was. And it's been a pretty interesting ride because
you said
of that.
a few times that you've got a story to tell or a message. What story or message is that?
Well, the short version, which is ironic because I think you just asked one question and that may have been 15 minutes of me talking nonstop. The short version, nonetheless, is that growing up, I was in a very difficult situation. Your childhood was poor, lots of violence, substance abuse, moving around, every possible toxic variable that people talk about when they say, this is my story, and it was a difficult story. Mine was just kind of a Frankenstein monster combination of all of those things, which culminated with an attempted suicide at age 18, which clearly I survived, which led me to conclude I must be harder to kill than the average person. But it was the walk back from that. It's how you get from a complete calamity to someone who has had the life that I've had. That
where'd you grow up, Mike?
Mostly the Midwest.
Okay.
I was my parents met in first year college. Mother gets pregnant. This was 1961, so that's pretty scandalous. So they get married and then immediately move to Los Angeles. I'm born in Los Angeles. A couple of weeks later, they return back to the Midwest as though nobody has a calendar or understands how that works. And they were clearly very young. My mother was crazy, basically. Had a lot of anger issues. Her own parents had divorced in an era when the only people who ever got divorced were Hollywood movie stars. My father was not up for the challenge that was her, and they separated when I was 3. And from that point on, it was my mother and I were very poor. My mother would console herself in temporary relationships. I think that would be the classy way to put it. And she was consistently drawn to the wrong guy, and so dangerous guys. She would sort of construe that for strength. Maybe there's something intriguing about that. Anyway, there was a lot of brokenness in her life with the loss of her father, with the divorce. And then she remarried a guy who was absolutely terrifying, beat her mercilessly.
This is, how old were you then?
They got together when I was 7.
Okay.
They got married when I was 7. I was 8 years old. The first time there was a fight that was loud enough to wake me up. And he was trying to break the bathroom door down. She had locked herself in the bathroom to protect herself. And they had numerous fights before then. I just wasn't aware of that at the point. I mean, fights where she'd end up, brandishing her .22 rifle at him, trying to get him to leave the house. But she was beat up. She was beat up a lot. But that first fight that I recall was the initial one where we left because, that's it. I'm done. This is over. Yeah. So we did the recurring thing, which was, we throw our stuff into a suitcase and we leave. And then, of course, we come back because he's sorry. And that, you've heard that cycle a million times.
I know this cycle.
Yeah. So we did it too. And, it leaves a mark mentally on the kid, just in terms of how they process the way that adults cope with things. Adults cope by fighting and drinking and overreacting and running away, and then basically redoing everything they said they would never do again, that's a very confusing,
some really bad mapping in your.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I had all of that going on, and then just a life of being poor. Kids would point out that I'm wearing the same clothes to school every day. I was very small and unathletic. I was getting my ass kicked every day. And so there wasn't anything happening in my early life that would indicate that I had any sort of reasonable expectation of success. So consequently, I did not. And, that just sort of led, in a downward trajectory. So getting back to the question of, what is it that you have to share? It's like, well, whatever's going on is not necessarily the way it has to continue. That would be the most terse explanation. And then everything that I did to kind of, move out of that and to get on a more productive path, which, really started with, my personal faith journey, but was augmented with every book I could get my hands on back in the, pre-internet era, when all the books were either at the public library or at something that we used to call bookstores at the mall. And there were magazines as well. So I was just sort of, picking and choosing. And I sort of found myself up to my elbows in the martial arts, getting back to kind of, if the martial arts was a vehicle that could make a small guy be able to do big things physically, well, how is that possible? It must be happening up here somehow. So that's where I was starting to put a lot of my initial resources. I'm 18, 19 years old now. I also am doing that journey solo, and I have nobody kind of suggesting, well, maybe you look more into this or look more into that. It was all just kind of, I'm doing this on my own. And so while the upside is, it was my own journey, I owned it. It was maybe, a more roundabout path than maybe it needed to be, but it ultimately seemed to work out. It's what led me into the military, and it's what propelled me just in terms of motivation to start excelling and never really wanting to stop excelling. the whole idea of pushing myself has never stopped. So I'm 61 now, and I'm still looking for the next thing that I can do that I can't do today. And that's just sort of the driver for me. And the thing that led me into this self-improvement space that I've been occupying since really 2012. That's when I left being the tactical guy, the trainer, the bodyguard, and moving more into a Tony Robbins type role, but nothing like Tony Robbins, nothing against Tony Robbins. But I'm me, with my story.
He's real tall.
And well, he is that. I do have a Tony Robbins story. The one time that he came to me for assistance, it's very short. It goes like this. I was taking care of security for Sylvester Stallone. It was a big wedding in Las Vegas. One of the invited guests was Tony Robbins. And when the first night, everybody was tucked in the banquet room and they're having their meal, rather than just kind of looming over the shoulder of Stallone and his wife like a vulture, I stood out in the entryway. And as I was standing by the door, trying not to be bothersome, the door cracked and a very large head poked out, and it smiled at me. It was Tony Robbins. And he said, "Hey, where's the bathroom?" And I said, "Right over there." And he said, "Thank you." So when the world needs help, they go to Tony Robbins. When Tony Robbins has a question he needs answered, well, clearly he came to the right guy. Anyway, I told you it was a short story, and I didn't say it was good. So yeah, it's the only one I have, as it turns out. So, but within this space, there are a lot of different people delivering similar types of messages. We'll say, trying to encourage people. Sharing some methodologies, but most of those methodologies are translated through the prism of, well, this is how I got from point A to point B. And, there are any number of those people in any number of different sort of vocational domains. I clearly am only going to appeal to certain types. I'm going to alienate just as many as I attract, maybe more. But the thing that I think differentiates me from that particular group as a whole is I have been tested in the real world. I have taught people who are real world operators, and I continue to test myself, granted in ways that probably seem rather unorthodox, but there's nothing hypothetical. There's nothing that has not undergone some sort of vetting that I advocate, which is why I believe the people who choose to work with me, or at least just acquire my materials and try to put them into practice, have been successful, because they've always been geared towards practicality rather than ethereality, or just being cool or mystical or anything like that. Because I think there's a lot of that is in that realm. And I think that's why a lot of more practically minded people think that that self-help stuff is all nonsense. It's all BS. Well, it's like, I can see why people would say that.
It surely can come off that way.
I'm sorry?
It surely can come off that way if one can't push through the BS.
Well, and I think that the BS is probably more representative of what's out there than the alternative, because the BS, I think, sounds more attractive. If I say that, we'll look at your customer base. If I can turn somebody into a hard shooter with no practice, or in a week, that's an intriguing premise, right?
Sure.
So if I say that I can take you from depressed to happy with no discernible effort, or in a ridiculously short period of time, that's going to attract people's attention. And some people are also just attracted to things that sound ultra complex, because that's intriguing. So if I come up with a whole bunch of unique terms, and sort of labyrinthian flow charts of here's where you are today, and you're going to ascend the Mike Gillette ladder of coolness, and then eventually you'll be up here at the top of the mountain, all wise and sage like myself. And maybe at the end I'm just not that good of a salesman, or I'm not that creative, but I know what I would respond to, and I don't respond to stuff that sounds like it would be nonsense. And that's sort of that's the person that I try to talk to. I think that if I was anything other than that, you probably wouldn't be talking to me today, because it would be so seemingly irrelevant. But my background is having done real things in real time, under real world circumstances, and that sort of colors everything I do. If things don't appear as though that they would be workable in that type of context, then it's not really of interest to me. In the same way that, we could go to a rodeo and see somebody who's a trick shooter. I love that. I think that's absolutely amazing. Good for you for putting in the kind of crazy practice that sort of thing requires, but beyond the entertainment value, it has no interest for me.
Sure, I get that.
I don't have an inclination to jump backwards on a horse and shoot at targets that make wacky sound effects, or however any of that works. My background with shooting is, well, what it is, and it's, I think, the practical application aspect that your students are interested in, and so forth. There's a real world reason why I would be studying a thing or teaching a thing, as opposed to look at this now. That may seem to fly in the face of, yeah, but dude, aren't you that same guy that like pushes rebar in your throat? What's the real world message? Well, it's a real-time demonstration. It's not anything that that I would advocate, and I'm certainly not qualified to teach anyone else how to do that, because I don't think crazy is something that you can teach.
You think you're crazy?
In a sense, but I think crazy is not a pejorative term in my mind. I mean, you're probably crazy because here you are, attempting to earn a living, doing something that I'm guessing that more practically minded friends of yours at one time or another probably told you was not going to work, not a good idea. You're a bright guy. You can do any number of things. Why aren't you doing that, Mickey? Why this gun stuff? What's that about?
Sure. Heard lots of that.
In that sense, I think a lot of us are crazy to the average, or to the more reasonably minded.
Do you think, so we talked a little bit about how you grew up, and I can relate to some of that stuff. Do you think some of what you've done with your life, you've found this positive path? Have you ever caught yourself maybe trying to run hard from that past, and the things that you've done are injurious to your health, mentally or physically, or has it ever taken an unhealthy turn for you, this path of sorting out what your limits are and such? Like, I know people, let me finish my point real quick. Like, I know people that are like I'm never going to be poor. So like, it can become so they could be so motivated by that thought that they do criminal things, or something that's hurtful to them, like stripping, or just something that's not a healthy, but they'll do anything to just not be hungry, or not have the water shut off. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think that's a really good question. And I think anybody who has been touched by extremes, and extremes can be positive or negative. And I think I've been touched by both. I think you always want to be somewhat introspective. I think you always want to look at, why are you doing a particular thing? Now, anybody who's interested in self-improvement should be asking themselves, okay, why am I possibly doing X or Y? In my case, because things were particularly horrible for a period of time, I absolutely believe that that acts on me in a particular way. I have not seen it manifest negatively unless somebody was going to say, Gillette, you're clearly obsessed, and being obsessed is negative. It's like, I think most successful people are obsessed. I think, again, the criteria of the average doesn't necessarily equate for a lot of us. Now, one of the things that I'm very focused on in terms of personal development is not just time management hacks or coming up with the optimal morning routine. To me, it's not just a recipe of, do X, Y, and, okay, now you're in this, upper tier Uber class of high achievers. High achieving is awesome. I think it's important. But one of the things that those 5 bodyguard years really made clear for me is you can be a really high achiever. In fact, you can be among the highest achievers in the world. But if you don't have your values figured out, if you are not living by those values, then all you are is a very successful example of somebody who's unhappy. And I have seen unhappiness play out at the highest ends of human accomplishment. And it was so instructive to me.
My belief is, on that a little bit more. So I'm assuming you're talking about the rich and famous.
Yeah. I worked with clients who I think had pursued monetary success so long and so hard that they perhaps never had an opportunity to really develop a well-rounded set of values. And if it becomes all about, how much more can I get or how big can I make the company, and you expect that when that happens, when you win that game, you're going to win all of the games, but then you find out that you don't win all of the games. You find out that the marriage is basically hollow. Or it's non-existent, or it's become something that you have deliberately punched holes in. One of my long-term clients was someone who was married to an absolutely beautiful woman, because that's what you do when you're a billionaire. But myself, other members of the security team were tasked with bringing women into the house, bringing women into the office, and then bringing them out ostensibly undetected. And I mean, that was just part of the job. And I hated it because, well, that's not, I mean, it's security management in terms of reputational security, but it's exactly what it was. I mean, I'm basically a well-armed, pimp. I hated it. And that's not who I wanted to be, but that's what the job was. And that's one of the things about the needs of the client sort of dictate what the job is. The job evolves based on who you're working for at any given moment. And a couple of our clients were absolutely upstanding quality people, and most of them weren't. Because when you're a billionaire, who says no to you? And when you're a multi-billionaire, who can say no to you? And the answer is nobody. And when you're not answering to anybody about anything, who do you become? I mean, the advantage that I have right now is I don't ever have to be put in that situation, find out. I may be an absolutely horrible person as a multi-billionaire. Thankfully, that's not going to be a problem I expect to confront anytime soon. But when you are within arm's length of all of these people who are as successful as any human can ever imagine being, and you see that for many of them, that success did not translate to the happiness that, we all assume that we would find. If I just had enough money, then I could be happy. Well, we all say that, because we just assume it to be true. It sort of makes sense, but it doesn't always work out that way. And so for me, it doesn't matter how, productive I am in a given day, if who I am personally, if the character piece is missing. So the most concise way I summarize how I approach self-improvement is who, not how. There's a lot of great how-to people out there. I mean, and you don't even need to work with, it's just, their books are out there. There's articles, ChatGPT can summarize all of those books for you in a few seconds. It's not a mystery, the how-to, but the who are you, or who can you become? That to me is much more rewarding. It's a much more compelling process. I want to be a better person. That's harder. It's much less intuitive than just, reading more books, making more money. Those mathematically trackable increments of improvement that we can point to, that's relatively simple. People have figured that out long before I came along. But can you harness that part of life and harness this other part? Can you be a better person who's also a more successful person? And how can you make all of that sort of intertwine in an organic way? So look at the work that you do, look at the work of your peers. You're making people safer. So, you're well taken care of for doing that, because you do it at a level that the marketplace recognizes and rewards. But if you do it the right way, if you look upon it as something that can be done with care and in compassion for your fellow man, it's something else entirely. Now it's not just a job. I'm a firearms instructor. Okay, there's tons of those guys. And not to take anything away from those guys, because there's an element of expertise that accompanies that, and a heavy element of responsibility to do that in a safe, appropriate manner. But to do it in a way that takes regular people, and regular people can even be your military LEO types too, because most of them are regular people. But if you can do it in a way that doesn't just make them more skillful, but makes them more comfortable, makes them better people, more responsible people, more grounded people, the person who's going to be less likely to freak out when everything starts, collapsing in and going haywire. That's a really big deal. That's more than just making a living. That's a public service. That's making the world a better place. So I think a lot of us are actually trying to do that. I just articulate it in a particular way so that it becomes more clear and evident, if that makes sense.
Sure. You had a pretty significant injury to one of your arms. And I think for a lot of people, that might be like a career ender for somebody that needs their body to do what you do. Talk about that a little bit.
I did. I had two. It was the same one. Yeah, on both arms. So 2011, 2015. I was in Vegas, still being an action trainer, bodyguard, and was working with a group of military personnel who may or may not guard a facility that may or may not exist in Nevada somewhere. And it was just, basic subject management stuff, standing jujitsu, if you like. And I was showing a particular guy sort of an armbar based control, and he was having a hard time getting it. And it was basically, it's like a 2-on-1, you're hyperextending, you're driving the arm up in the shoulder, you're kind of just, moving somebody in a direction for their own good. And he really wasn't cinching it up correctly. So I pulled his partner away from him, and I said, I'm going to talk you through it. You're going to do it to me. And we'll make sure that you get it. So we did it a few times, and he's got it in good. And then he said, I said, okay, now, give it some tension so you can kind of feel like it, what it is sort of in the latter stages. And he did. And I said, okay, cool. I said, okay, keep pushing. Now, I was basically in that moment just kind of giving him, in my mind, a sense of, some people can take a fair bit of pressure. And my pain threshold is a little wonky just because of the things that I do. most people, oh, that hurts. They stop whatever it is that they're doing. I don't stop right away. I've sort of developed this ability where things hurt. Yeah, they hurt later, maybe 30 seconds later, maybe 30 minutes later. I mean, I feel everything that I do. I just don't feel it in the moment. It's kind of like I feel the pain. I'm going to put it on hold. Otherwise, I couldn't do the things that I do. So here I am sort of not feeling the fact that my arm is starting to hyperextend, and I just keep pushing. You're good. And at this point, I didn't think I was in any danger. And then all of a sudden, the bicep reps, and it was loud, and that was pretty significant. It was on my right hand. This was a training day. I was going to go back to my normal duties, which was running an EP team. Well, now I can't drive. I can't shoot. I can't even eat with my right hand. So that required surgery. Now I was 49, and there was no clear sense for me because I knew guys that had torn biceps. They'd been repaired successfully. I knew guys that it was never the same. And I'm 49, which at the time, that was the oldest I'd ever been. So it seemed significant in that moment. And so that was the first injury that I had to get over. And getting over the injury was really, I think, more mental than anything else. The surgeon that I had was unbelievable. He had a medical practice, and all he did was work from the elbow to the shoulder. He only did that. That was literally it. That was his deal. And guy was amazing. And everything was a success, and I was able to kind of bounce back from that. And
how long did it take for you to build that muscle back up?
About a year. A year. And one of the things that was most notable is because of the things I do or especially did, my grip strength is pretty significant. And that was the thing that I noticed because I couldn't do anything with this. And it was the ability to death grip things. That's how you bend a horseshoe. That's how you roll up a frying pan. You have to really be able to lock things down. And that, now I got most of it back, but it was never the same. To this day. I mean, my grip strength is still, pretty ominous compared to the average, but it's still not quite what it was. And because I couldn't train, I lost weight. I lost about 20 pounds, which I did not have that much to lose. So that was kind of scary. And I mean, this just looked like a piece of spaghetti. And at post-surgery, when 3 weeks had gone by, it's like, okay, you're starting to do some weight bearing. Okay, cool. Like how much weight? Like a teacup. What? I mean, the hard part was being a good patient and not trying to second guess the expert, because you know how we are. Well, I'll just speed this up. I know my own body.
Right.
Yeah, but it was knowing my own body that caused the injury in the first place. So I was sufficiently humbled by that experience. And it was a couple of years later that I snapped this one. And I was sort of expecting that it might happen because when they operated here, the doctor said, your tendon was really frayed, which suggests that your other one probably is as well. Just a lot of repetitive use injuries, just a life of being me. So this one was from breaking baseball bats, which was not something I had to do. It was just something I thought would be cool. And the first one broke so easy, I was kind of not real attentive to the second one. So I only got two before it snapped, and it snapped, same loud noise, rolled up, all of that, surgery.
So as you're pulling to break the bat, you just too much horsepower, instead of the bat breaking, your bicep tendon blew.
Right. For a split second, I thought it was the sound of the Louisville Slugger cracking. No, it was me. It was the bicep, and it was like that quick double pop sound, the same double pop I remembered from a couple of years earlier. And, so it was the same thing, immobilize the arm, get looked at.
Was it excruciating to snap that tendon?
The second one was not as painful as the first one. And I have no idea why, but yeah, the first one was absolutely horrible. Really, really bad. Now, I mean, they both looked really bad, just that black, purple, yellow, weird bruise and the biceps up here. And, when your biceps up here and you can't really work your arm, you do have concerns about how this is going to go. Mm-hmm. But the first surgery had been so successful that I was, relatively optimistic that a good surgeon would probably be able to take care of me on the left side as well. And he was great. And I came back from that. The only other significant injury I had since then was another muscle tear. And I don't know exactly when it happened, but I got out of the shower about 3 years ago. And I noticed that this pec part of it was over here. And the strange part is when you remember, the last time I tore my muscle, that was not anything I would have slept through. That was a pretty significant moment. It had all my attention. So it had just happened. And unfortunately, most bicep tears occur from, guess what, benching too heavy, there's a shock. And it's almost always like 80+%, it's this tendon here. And it's very easy to repair. These tendons here on the inside are infinitesimally small. There's just no fixing it, which means that for the past 3 years, a lot of the work that I would usually do in a weight room, I can't do. I can't do any sort of direct chest pressing. So ring dips, things like that, which were a staple for me. I mean, and were probably my downfall, because you can see clips of me on YouTube doing ring dips with like multiple cinder blocks hanging off my waist, that kind of a thing. So there's a reason why I might be prone towards torn muscles. But
so you think that your overusage led to all of that?
That's what the docs say.
Would you change it?
No, I'm good. I mean, other than, I missed the direct chest work. I missed having a chest. But, I can still overhead press with no issue. Shoulders feel great. Shoulders are nice and strong.
Can you do a push-up?
I can. I just, unless I'm demoing it for somebody, that's about the only time that I do it. And there are certain feats of strength I don't do anymore, just because there's so much, chest contraction that happens. So like, I don't roll frying pans anymore. I've probably got 1 or 2 more pans in me. If the president were to ask me to roll a frying pan, it's like, okay, sir, for you, I'll do it. But that would be a special occasion, because all this is going to keep doing is just migrating over and over if I subject it to any above and beyond type strain. So, I mean, and it still gets modest stimulation doing other exercises, just because that's how the body is. But I don't do anything direct. So I haven't done, ring push-ups or reverse grip push-ups, which were a favorite, or, any sort of fly movements. I used to do a lot of iron cross variations on the rings, which again is probably, what would have weakened this or roughened this tissue up over time. But it's just wear and tear. I'd rather to have done the things that I've done than to be completely intact and weak, if that makes sense.
Sure. Different kind of weakness you would have.
Yeah, that good way to put it.
I have been quite focused on recovery the last year or two, because I've never had any surgeries. I probably should have. I got a piece of steel in my head, so I can't get an MRI. So anytime I've had an injury, they want to order CAT scans, which I kind of push back from, because it's, huge doses of radiation. But it's an interesting thing. We do all this stuff in the quest of like protecting our body to prolong life, and maybe in some senses be more apt to win in violence to prolong life, and then we trash ourselves in the endeavor.
Right. That's an interesting point, and it's certainly a valid point. I saw examples of that long ago when I was on active duty, because that was an era of training when, I refer to the training that I was introduced to way back then as, it was all sort of governed by the law of accumulation, which that's just something that I coined, which is the more of something you do, the more awesome you are. So if you run 10 miles a day, you're this awesome. If you run 15 miles a day, you're this awesome. 20 miles a day, you're way up here. And that's it made sense. There was just this very quantifiable aspect to that idea. Of course, there's no science behind that. That's just
my tennis elbow is not awesome. Doing hundreds of push-ups in a day is not awesome. Yeah.
That's such a great example, because when I was on active duty, the book Delta Force came out, which was Charlie Beckwith, the commander of Delta Force. He sort of wrote about the origins of how the unit came to be, sort of right up through the ill-fated Iran rescue mission. And he talked about a guy in the book who did 1,000 push-ups a day. Now, not in a row. He would do sets of 100. And that, to me, I'm like 20 at the time. It's like, okay, that's it. I'm going to be that guy. So that became my thing. And then I was the guy who could do, sets of 100. I did 100 push-ups every day. Now, is that a good idea? Hell no.
Yeah.
I mean, the wear and tear, I mean, oddly prophetic given the injury history we're just sort of recounting. But I was obsessed with that. It just sounded so freaking cool. I'm that guy now. 1,000 push-ups a day, no recovery. Okay, I didn't do it on Sunday. Okay, so there's that. But what's hilarious to me in retrospect is there was literally no change to my body. And I was running a lot in those days. So I was like an extremely lean. I was still 5'9", but I was probably like 167 pounds. And I was a skinny dude who could just do a crap ton of push-ups.
Your muscles became super efficient at those movements.
Yeah, because it's what the body does. It's like, how can we, do this with the least expenditure of energy possible? The answer is by not putting on any weight.
Yeah.
Now, which was frustrating to me at the time, because I'm 167 pounds and I'm reading the Weider magazines, and God help me, I'm taking the Weider weight gain because I'm expending like 1 million calories a day being me, because I swam a lot at lunchtime. I was running about 60 miles a week, and, the push-ups, and that didn't count the 3 days that I would go to the gym to do the Nautilus circuit, because that was still the flavor of the month. So, and I wasn't doing anything exceptional. All of my friends were doing the exact same thing. We were just training until we fell over, and and then we'd get up and high five each other and then do the same thing tomorrow. It was the law of accumulation. The more stuff we do, hence the more awesome we have made ourselves. With no actual data to support that.
Yeah, it was just like hoping it turned out good. My friend Z likes to say, he was a Green Beret. He's a jiu-jitsu black belt MMA guy, and he's my age. Now his motto is do a little, a lot. So, go train for an hour instead of 4 hours of jiu-jitsu. Go take a nap. Yeah.
Real good friend of mine who is he's a Vegas cop and a jiu-jitsu black belt. He's a staff instructor at the Extreme Couture, and he's got this program, Police Jiu-Jitsu, and he's got like affiliate departments in schools. And that's the first guy I started hearing that from. Train a little, a lot. And it was like, as soon as he said it, it's like, I'm a little jealous I didn't come up with that, because that's pretty clever. And it's so dead on. And having been an expert of the opposite approach, train everything all the time, always. It's like, okay, you can, but you won't necessarily survive that.
I think it's not a new concept. The Stoics talked about these things. Yeah. It's not like young men to do that, though. Like you said, I have a friend, Frank Rodriguez is his name. Lovely human, retired as a major out of the unit. And he was a PJ before he went to the Army. And I didn't believe it, but I think he told me that he at one point was doing like 1,500 push-ups a day. And now he's a couple years younger than you. He had a pond at his house. He was became a policeman after his time in the Army, and would like
To
wake up
unwind.
yeah. He'd wake up at like 4 a.m. and
Hmm.
swim like 2 miles out in this pond. It'd be like
Hmm.
November, and he'd go
Hmm.
swim laps and run, and still like he had like weight training. He's still really fit, but it's like, I think some of us have a screw kind of, like
It's
something short circuiting there.
Yeah. I love hearing examples like that. It makes those of us who trend towards the extreme feel a little bit more normal, maybe. But it's inspiring too. I just love guys that just won't stop. There's just something cool, and there comes a point, and I think the point you made a moment ago. It's like, it doesn't matter if the Stoics were saying, train a little, a lot. If I was in my 20s, I wouldn't have listened. I would say, those
Right.
Stoics are idiots, man. They're punks.
Right. The
I
hell
know
did
better.
Marcus Aurelius know? He's a
Right. Yeah.
dumbass.
Yeah. What an idiot. It's like, you want to be awesome. You got to do everything all the time. So, but there comes a point where, age, wisdom, you intellectually process the idea that, okay, maybe that sort of, gung-ho balls to the wall thing isn't the best, or doing that to the exclusion of more moderate, concepts isn't the best. But, your guy with the pond and in the running and the being a cop, because apparently he didn't get enough of that out of his system being a PJ or being in the unit. When you know that what you're doing is extreme and that you still do it anyway, there's something about that really speaks to me. That warms my heart in a strange way, because it's Don Quixote tilting at the windmill. It's like, yeah, okay, I know this is probably nuts, but this is who I am, and I am not going to adjust who I am unless I absolutely have to. And as of today, I'm still kicking ass, so I won't. And I get a lot of sort of furrowed eyebrows based on things that I do to this day. I mean, I was 59 when I did that TV appearance on what was called the Go Big Show, and when I got up from the stage after having the brick smashed on my midsection by the professional wrestler, and there were still pieces of glass sticking out of my back, to T-Pain's horror. It's like, it would be easy to look at that. It's like, okay, that guy's just clearly off. And okay, maybe,
Yeah, I
but
remember seeing that, the glass sticking out of your back.
yeah. And what was funny is they had a backstage medic, and he had been a medic in the Marines and so forth. And his gig, he just travels. He does different TV shows, and like a lot of TV shows, if they go overseas, and medical care is not always predictable. Like, so he does that. And he's like super accomplished. He saw that and literally sprinted up to the stage after I was off camera, and was extremely disappointed that I did not need like any of his gee whiz, techniques. It's like, yeah, just a couple of band-aids, I'll be good. Oh man, you could hear the disappointment. But it's in the doing of those things that it's still speaking to me, presently. And granted, glass, that was sort of a special occasion thing. That was for TV. That you need to do something. And the format of that show is, if you make it through the next round, you have to have something bigger, the Go Big Show. So like the ascendancy of ridiculousness was pretty significant in my case. So maybe it was good that I didn't last beyond the first round. But the impetus for all of that is still feels very fresh and still feels very relevant to me. And I'm going to roll with that. People say, like, what is it with you and strength? It's like, why are you still working out? You clearly don't have to, whatever that means, which is kind of an odd statement if you really dissect it. And I simply say, I want to be as strong as I can for as long as I can. Now, am I as strong today as I was 10 years ago? not in every way, but in a couple of ways, I can point to some things that have actually improved, which is pretty crazy. Now, there's obviously a sliding scale. I mean, it happens to Arnold, it'll happen to us mortals.
Sure.
It goes like this. But I want to be as strong as I can for as long as I can. And with that as an objective, it allows me to not get stressed out or frustrated when I see the inevitable decline of time. Because, okay, maybe I can't be as strong at 61 as I was at 58, but I can be the strongest 61-year-old I can be. And I'm good with that. So that also forces me to look for the most innovative ways to keep this machine rolling. I'm like a classic car, and classic cars are interesting. They don't run like they used to, and they don't compare to the newer cars. But if you take good care of them, and you problem solve effectively, you can keep that thing on the road for a while. And it's kind of cool to be able to do that.
I like that. That your point about the strongest version of you today, that's something we talk about with our jiu-jitsu crew. Like I was just talking to my friend Bryce Frank. He was a multi-time national Muay Thai heavyweight champion. I think he was ranked 3 in the world at one time for heavyweight Muay Thai.
Impressive.
Yeah, really good fighter. And he started jiu-jitsu later in life, and he's done a lot of competitions. He's in his 40s. He's a cop or two. And he's telling me yesterday, like I'll never win the adult national title. Like, cause you're like, these are 20-something-year-olds and he's pushing 50. It's like, I can win a master's division, which would be cool, but I've kind of got to like give up the fact that no matter how much I train, I'm not going to walk in and join, excuse me, like the adult division, which is like the big prize, and win against 24-year-olds, 25-year-olds. And that's a little bit, I think it could be a defeatist mindset at the same point, but the conversation he and I had is I can be the baddest ass 47-year-old at 180 pounds. I can be the baddest ass 55-year-old. We got a guy at our gym, Derek, who's just coming off of a second shoulder surgery in 2 or 3 years. And this guy wins all the championships at his age and weight, just crushes dudes. And I don't think he's going to let up anytime soon, but we all are watching our friends go through surgeries and stuff. And so we're thinking, like, what is the juice worth the squeeze? Like, is a medal or a trophy on the wall at the gym worth that you can't wipe your own ass because your arm's in a sling or
Right. Yeah. And that's, I think it's good to have a vehicle like that, whether it's jiu-jitsu or whatever else, where you have to perpetually take inventory. There was one of the knocks that I get on social media is that I post my own quotes, to which I will say, well, no one else is going to. And
somebody says to you, like only a douche posts their own quotes.
Not to my face, but
somebody wrote that.
But there's a lot of that, sort of veiled. It's like, wow, you must think you're really important. It's like, social media exists to propagate your own point of view. In my, this is my point of view, in bite-sized chunks, and at the same time, the quote thing for me became an exercise in trying to consolidate an idea in as brief a manner as I can, which, as you can tell from how long it takes me to answer a question, that doesn't come naturally to me. But there's one quote that comes from someone else that I share quite a bit. It comes from a famous and strange martial artist guy named Guy Savelli. So if you ever saw the movie Men Who Stare at Goats or are familiar with the book, he was the actual goat staring guy who was able to, stare through the wall and slow the goat's heart rate and all of that stuff. There was an actual thing that happened that led to that title, but then it sort of became this zany movie. But Guy Savelli, who initially attracted the attention of the Army when he was brought in to teach an abbreviated hand-to-hand combat course in the context of SEER training, back when, you know, SEER was at Bragg and only there. And the idea was, how can you teach guys to fight who are malnourished, injured, or both, on the run, all of these things. You know, you're as about suboptimum as you can possibly be. So it's got to be, you know, simple and gross motor stuff and all of this. So he was brought in to solve all of that, and he, you know, created a program that was in use for a while back in the 80s, and his material sort of migrated into the SF community for a time. He has a quote, and I love it. I cite it frequently, and it's, you either know what you can do, or you just think you know. You either know what you can do, or you just think you know. And most people just think they know. And the reason they think they know is because they don't go to jujitsu a couple of times a week. You know, they don't go to the gym a couple times a week. They remember what they could do once upon a time, and they extrapolate, well, this is what I can probably do. And I'm one of those people that likes knowing what they can do. I mean, yeah, I may, you know, want to take a moment and commemorate what I could do a million years ago when I was, you know, super special in some special way. But I'm not interested in living there. You know, I'm not going to put on the old football jacket and, you know, go to the malt shop and, you know, relive days gone by. Well, I'm not going to admit to it anyway. But I'm very interested, you know, what can I do today? You know, how much of that old version of me has carried through up till now? And that's what's interesting to me. It's not that other ideas or approaches to all of that aren't valid. They're just not they're not of value to me. And so that's kind of the quest, you know, this ongoing, you know, what can we do today? What can we be better at tomorrow? And that's sort of even more resonant as I become older, as some of the people I work with, you know, become older. How do you improve upon yourself when you are at a certain age? Because most people aren't thinking about improving. They're just thinking about maintaining or just approximating as best one can, which is reasonable. But the way that we look at what we're doing is also very important. You know, so you know that as an instructor, if somebody on the range is struggling with confidence, and they frame a problem a particular way, you'll probably spin that into a more optimistic sounding premise, right? Because what we do, well, I try to do that with absolutely everything that I do. You know, what is the most productive way of looking at a situation in any situation? And that's what leads me to, you know, say simple things like, be as strong as I can for as long as I can, because that's a very forward-looking, optimistic worldview that is still not denying reality. Because that's the other thing. You can take the idea of framing things in a positive way to an extreme where it just becomes a positive affirmation that you regurgitate multiple times in front of a mirror, which is, I hate to tell people this, it's pointless, because you can't lie to yourself. You know, you can't, you know, the conscious mind is not going to allow that to stand. If I stand in front of the mirror because I lack confidence, and I look at myself and very convincingly try to say, I'm a confident person. I say that like 25 times in a row. Every time I say that, my mind is spitting back to me, nope,
no, you're not.
No, you're not. Yeah. It's not just going to accept that. Now, I can change the phrasing. I could say something like, every day I am doing the work I need to do to become a more confident person. Now, which would be step one. Step two would be, are you actually doing that work, or are you lying about that too?
Right.
Because, you know, even though we can't convincingly lie to ourselves, that doesn't stop us from trying. We try an awful lot, you know, and you see it in what you do. How many tactical guys, you know, come into your classes, you know, with all of the gear and the attitude, and then it comes time to perform it, Usually I can do this no problem.
No, you can't.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, no, you can't.
Usually you're not doing this. That's the problem. And the ironic thing is, it's like going to the gym. Guy, if you just go, you'll get better. If you just do what I say and keep practicing, you'll get better. You won't be ninja class, but you'll get better. And then you won't have to come up with all of these, very creative rationales for why something's not working today. It must be the gear,
Faith without works.
Well, I can't top that.
You got to apply some action.
Yeah, you just shut me up with that one. That was just like so concise and on the money.
I'm looking at the cross around your neck, so that the little scripture came to mind.
Yeah. No, there you go.
I think those truisms, like man looks at these problems and we collectively eventually arrive at the right conclusion, like people thinking about it. And like the Latin phrase, facta non verba, deeds, not words. Like you gotta go do it.
Yeah.
You could have a whole bookshelf full of like how to, but you gotta go pick the hammer up or whatever it is and go do some actual work.
I love that you're saying that, Mickey, because that's one of my the things that I sort of struggle with some people within this realm of personal development is, when you have a book, can I have a book, or you have, video courses, I have those. If you go and do workshops, I've been known to do those. Every now and then you encounter the person that, yeah, it was interesting what you said, but I knew all of that. And that is probably an accurate statement. It's like when people go on Amazon and they do a review of my book, Mind Boss. It's like, yeah, this is all just common sense. Yeah, but are you doing any of it?
Right.
That's like, and I always, you use the hammer analogy. I always use the analogy of the push-up. Okay. Everybody knows what a push-up is, but are you doing them? Because if you're not, that's probably the problem. So it's different in the realm of personal development because the information, the methods, the hacks, whatever, they're all processed intellectually. I read it in the book, but it's like, okay, I know what that guy is saying. I know what Tim Ferriss is saying. I know what Tony Robbins is saying. I get it. No, you don't. You don't get it until you're actually doing it. You're picking up the hammer, you're doing the push-up. But because you've assimilated it initially, you think you have it. So what happens is you read that book, but nothing changes. I must need a different book. Okay, so you read this book, and then you read that book. You go to this workshop, you watch, this TikTok video, and all of those things are saying largely the same types of things. I mean, is there anything in any decent self-help book that Marcus Aurelius, to use your guy, wasn't talking about many, many years earlier? And the answer is no. Semantics change, the references change. That's about it. The concepts, if they were true then, they're true now. So what's the weak link? Where is the problem? Well, it's in the application. One of those numerous Mike Gillette quotes goes something along the lines of, the answer, to the question is not the answer. It's the application of the answer. It's you have to do the thing. About those push-ups, are you doing them yet? And there we go.
Yeah, let's go back to those push-ups that you're not doing.
Yeah. It's like, and the thing is, it's always more interesting to just read the next book than to do the stuff, because a lot of the stuff, particularly in the mental realm, it can be tedious. It's not the cool part of whatever it is that you're doing. So like I've worked a lot with athletes. Okay. Going to the gym is not the fun part of being a competitive swimmer. Doing mind exercises is not the fun part of being a competitive swimmer. Kicking ass in the pool, that's the fun part, So to actually knuckle down and do the more mundane, less dramatic things, that's typically where it's like you can tell right away when someone shows up to your class and maybe they don't get to the range that much, but they're knocking out the dry fire. They're doing this stuff. They're moving from this position to the next, and they're pretty smooth. You can tell who's putting in the time and who's not. and who's making excuses for not, all of that. And I think it's always the unfun aspects of anything that define who's the person who stands above. What is your appetite for that which is tedious, for that which is unsexy? Because if you can stay on top of that, in addition to the cool parts, because everything has got its cool parts. But those of us who just focus on the cool parts tend to be very one-dimensional at whatever it is that we do.
My father he's a good guitarist, real good guitarist, and people would always say, like, "Oh, you're so gifted," and he'd politely just say, "Yeah, thanks." But like, I would hear him say, like, they had no idea that while all my friends were out at prom or whatever, I was in my bedroom going, playing scales and listening to records and tweaking out on the minutia of how to create the music that he now can, which seems so effortless. But yeah, that's
such a good analogy, because we equate the arts, with that mystical quality called talent. And clearly there are people who have talent. I mean, there are people that have like amazing ears and so forth, but there's the grind aspect of it that, that's where the magic is, I think. The magic is in the non-magical.
My nephew, Gabe Shook, same last name as my brother Tommy's kid. He was like 2 years old on a skateboard, like could just walk, and my brother bought him like a miniature skateboard, and this kid had fall down 9 million times in my mom's driveway with his little helmet and elbow pads on, and he'd get up and like look at the skateboard and get back on it. Now he's like basically a professional skateboarder, travels all over the country. He's sponsored by all these skateboard companies. Crazy videos of like him, doing stuff that would scare you as a relative watching him, but he's super skilled at it. But people look at him and they're like, "Oh, wow, that's awesome." They don't realize that literally pretty much every bit of free time, he's 16 now. So 14 years of his 16-year life, 90-something% of his entire life, all that free time was on a skateboard, falling down. Like there's tricks he's done. And like everybody screams in the background, and he'll tell you they don't realize, watching this 10-second video clip of me launching off of these steps, I fell 50 times and did it, until I got the damn thing.
Well, I like that example too, because, so we equate talent with, the creative things, but something like skateboarding, well, that's fun. That's like a fun activity. So most people wouldn't think about work being necessary to manifest that level of fun, we'll say. So his artistry in something which, has its creative aspects too, it's the grind. The magic is in the unmagical. And
it's super physical too, right? You're drenched in sweat.
And body awareness and just so many things. That's like, that is, you can will yourself to become a competent wrestler or, a competent football player. There's nothing fair about the guy who becomes exceptional at skateboard. There's just some intangibles that you have, to really be, to have, a YouTube channel that gets a lot of hits or whatever. So
I can't cross a sidewalk on a skateboard. I could go on my slack line and do, I can have a 300-pound, not 300, I can have 200 pounds in my hands on that slack line, or I can dry fire a shotgun on it. I can't ride a skateboard across 2 foot of sidewalk without almost falling.
Yeah, it's interesting how something like slackline, which would seemingly, translate, but it's its own thing. I mean, that's a really nice stimulus.
Yeah.
Which is also something that I think is really cool that you do that. Just because to this day, I haven't seen any other, gun guru.
I'm not a gun guru.
Well, so that we're clear, I called you that. You did not refer to yourself as such, and you immediately dismissed the accolade or the descriptor. But you were the first gun guy. Is that less listen,
whatever you want, whatever you want to call me, Mr. Gillette.
to like post videos on a Slack line. I thought, wow, that's, of course he's doing that. Why wouldn't he do that? But I never thought of it myself. And to this day, I haven't, because it was about 5 years ago, I think, when I saw you do that. That was the first time that I was aware of.
Oh, cool.
So clearly you've been doing it a while. And just the idea of bringing in these different types of motor skill variables, these attribute variables, and that's something I was always very keen on when I was very much entrenched in use of force training and so forth. Is how can we make it better, because I'm old enough to be a relic of when all of that training was pretty static. And it's baton day, it's gun day, it's DT day, it's it's pepper spray day, it's whatever, and everything happened in its own vacuum because, well, that's just easy to manage. And has zero to do with reality, of course. And gosh, why are cops making these poor decisions? Why are they having a hard time integrating all of their skills? They were never taught to integrate their skills. They were taught to do the opposite. So
it seems to be slowly changing.
Well, there's so much good training out there now that would be, if you're a 20-something cop, you would have no idea how Stone Age it was 25 years ago. And it's not like we were stupid back then. It's just that it was logistically simple. Because
you guys also 30, 20 years ago had a completely different mandate from the general public. People now expect police officers to be mental health professionals. I got a local sheriff's deputy friend of mine. He's retired now, but he told me a story about a mom that like once a month would call 911 because her kid would not eat and get on the bus. Like you'd go to, maybe not go to jail, but you'd be charged if you're calling 911 20, 30 years ago for such a thing. And now like he'd have to show up and be like, Timmy, eat your oatmeal and get on the, and he didn't have to do that, but he thought, I'm here, I'm going to try to do something valuable. And because he couldn't arrest the mom, he would have been in trouble.
That's an interesting example, I think, from the standpoint of I don't know if it's the evolutionary nature of the profession, but just the profession has always been trying to accommodate unusual needs without necessarily being prepared for. Now, I was just coming in, so like in the academy, I was getting all of the mental health intervention training and so forth. That was happening then, but it was woefully inadequate. It still is, but yet the expectations are still there, and more so because, why do people call the cops? Well, they're free and they're always open, so it's like, who else are you going to call?
Sure.
When people say, well, we don't need so many cops, we need more mental health people. Well, what, you need them 24 hours a day, like maybe in a special outfit so people will know who they are? I mean, basically what they're talking about are, surrogate cops. And even that's sort of oversimplification, but the part about the job that I liked was knowing that I would be thrown into any number of potentially new things that I had never been exposed to before, not necessarily prepared for, and I had to sort of sort that out. I liked that. That was cool. At the same time, that was also one of the inherent frustrations with the job, because how can I do an effective job in those situations? Because sometimes I would get lucky. Okay. I figured out what I came up with seemed to do the trick. And then other days it wouldn't. And that was frustrating to me, just because I wanted to be a skillful practitioner of my profession. And, cops still have to sort of wrestle with that. They're put in all of these situations that they are not prepared for to the extent that they should be. Certainly from a safety perspective, and the whole complexion of that aspect of the job is much different now than it was, simply because there is an expectation that amongst some members of the public that everything that the cop does is wrong and spiteful and ill-intended. That's not necessarily a word, but you get the idea. There's so much scrutiny now that leads to more of what the problem has always been. Because even back in my day, when there was a little bit more acceptance of, okay, the cops are trying to make very quick decisions in ambiguous situations, so we're going to accept that sometimes that decision is not going to be correct once all of the smoke clears and the facts are known, all of the facts.
I don't like correct. How about the best?
Well,
possible?
Yeah, reasonable, appropriate. Yeah. Okay, but correct with, in the cop context. But yeah, that's true, and we have to be very mindful of those semantic distinctions, particularly now. But the sense that every cop is potentially suspect and is a closet racist and so forth. I mean, it's like that was not something that I had to contend with. And even back in my day, there was, in any crazy, ambiguous, dangerous circumstance, there's a lot of, internal dialogue and second guessing. In my book, Mind Boss, I tell a tale on myself that happened when I was still in the FTO program, when I hesitated in a circumstance that could have been absolutely fatal. It wasn't, just because I was lucky, but you get caught up in your own head a lot. Well, I can't imagine how much more that is prevalent in today's era, because everybody's got, the phone and everybody's screaming at you. I mean, as soon as you get out of the car, you're wrong for being, you shouldn't be there, go away. And it just sort of accelerates. So the amount of what the typical cop is having to process, and I think this carries to, the typical armed citizen, because they're scrutinized to a greater degree now than I think they would have been even 5 years ago. Certainly 10 years ago.
I agree with that.
So how you prepare your students for that reality is a little different, I would expect. And I think the questions that probably come up for you in a typical class are getting a lot more focused and a lot more urgent than they used to be.
I agree with that.
It used to be, I was, in preparation for this conversation, I was just curious, hey, who's Mickey been talking to recently? Like, holy cow, it's like a kaleidoscope of all of these Renaissance men. It's an interesting collection of people, but I believe I saw a photo of Masada Yubin there. Far back. Yeah. And, so that's a figure I'm familiar with. He was in all of the magazines back when there were magazines, and
sure,
we all had, at least in the gravest extreme. And if you just knew that stuff, which was no small thing, but if you knew that stuff and you could say that stuff under, cross-examination, you're probably going to be fine. But it's having to know all of the things and then defend yourself against all of these hypothetical, character attacks that are coming just because, you have that job now, and the perception of that job is so specific and so finely pointed compared to what it was just a few years ago.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's this rapidly ever evolving world. I just looked at the time. I've got a fireworks show to prepare for. What are you doing? What are you doing today for the 4th?
Family, food, fireworks. Yeah, much the same.
Good. Lovely. Parting words. If somebody watching, listening never crosses your path or meets you in person, what would you leave them with?
Well, I would challenge them to look at ways that they can become more, and not become more just, in the superficial, success-driven sort of way, but to become. I think everybody wants to leave a legacy, and I think the way that we leave a legacy is that we pursue something meaningful, and that means that we have to figure out what is meaningful to us. What is of value, and I think when we get clear on that, which is a step that I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about, or they don't devote a lot of thought to it. But I think if you get a little bit more in line with what is important to you, what gives you a sense of purpose, that if you start pursuing that, you are going to not just live a more satisfied life for yourself. You're sending a big message. You're telling a story. The people around you, family, friends, when they see you driven towards things that are meaningful rather than monetary, that you'll be sending the strongest and most productive message that you could.
I dig that. How do people find you, Mike?
Easiest to find me in the conventional social media channels. So, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and you can follow me for a while, see if what I'm saying resonates, it's helpful, and if so, great. And if not, we'll part friends.
MikeGillette.
That's it.
And you've got some books out there. Books.
A couple books, one on mental training, one on physical training, a plethora of digital programs on various aspects of personal development. So, everything from mind exercises to how to reprogram your subconscious, that kind of thing. It's all out there.
I appreciate you taking the time again to visit with us. I hope to see you again and continue talking and learning from you. You guys that have tuned in, please leave a review as to what you thought about this conversation. If you're not following this channel, please consider doing so. Go give Mike a follow. Definitely good stuff. If you follow any of the stuff that we do here on the Higher Line and CarryTrainer channel, you'll dig what Mike does. Happy 4th, even though you're going to be watching this after the fact. I hope you had a lovely holiday and you can celebrate Independence Day every day. Be well, don't be dickheads. Peace out. Visit our website, CarryTrainer.com, for information about classes held throughout the U.S., CarryTrainer apparel, and upcoming projects. You can also email us at training@CarryTrainer.com for information about setting up your own private course or speaking engagement. Training@CarryTrainer.com or CarryTrainer.com. Hey man, what are you doing in the podcast room, Steve?
I'm writing a national anthem. It's going to be at folk festivals for Gunfighter Gunawell.
Oh.
Let me tell you about Gunfighter Gunawell. Made in the USA. Gunfighter Gunawell, 100% synthetic. It's gonna last you, baby. Yeah. Gunfighter gun oil is the best I've ever seen. It's gonna make you get everything that you've ever seen. Oh, baby, I love me some gunfighter gun oil. Yeah. Oh, gunfighter gun oil. Gunfighter.
Gonna get my lighter out. I don't have it.
It wasn't even Bob Dylan. It was like a love story.